Born in a small town, how did he become the dictator who destroyed German democracy and caused the deaths of millions? This is the story of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in the town of Braunau am Inn, located in Upper Austria, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His father, Alois Hitler, was a customs officer, and his mother was Clara Posel. Adolf was the fourth of 6 children in the family and was born an Austrian citizen. His name, in Old German, meant noble wolf, and he was known by those close to him as Adi. Hitler's childhood was marked by frequent relocations. In 1892, the family moved to Passau, in 1895 to Haffeld, and later to Lambach and Leonding. In primary school, he was considered an intelligent student, but during his secondary school years, he lost interest in his studies. He particularly enjoyed the classes of his geography and history teacher, Leopold Pach, and read Karl May's novels with great interest, although his father wanted him to become a civil servant. This pressure caused Hitler to lose motivation for school. In 1904, Hitler enrolled in secondary school in Steyr, but due to poor grades and health problems, he left without receiving a diploma. He then returned to Linz to live with his mother. Hitler completed his primary education in his hometown. He began his secondary education in Linz, but had to repeat the first year of high school. He clashed with his father, who wanted him to become a civil servant, as he dreamed of becoming a painter. He skipped classes he disliked and respected only his history teacher. Confident in his drawings, he continued to resist his father's wishes. Before joining World War I, he had produced more than 2,000 drawings and paintings. I excelled most in history and geography. Around this time, I became a nationalist and learned to grasp the real meaning of history. My speaking skills grew through persuasive speeches to childhood friends, and I became a small, self-willed leader. Studying came easily to me, and in my spare time, I took singing lessons with the Lambach canons. Hitler was stubborn about becoming a painter and confident in his dream of being an artist, which for him was a true ideal. Yet he agreed with his father's advice about the struggle for life, believing he should have a secure profession. He could not understand why I rejected what had once been the cornerstone of his life. Thus, my father's decision was simple, certain, and natural. Hardened by life struggles, he would not allow me, an inexperienced youth, to decide my own future. But in the end, things turned out very differently. At 13, his father died of a lung hemorrhage while out for a morning walk, passing away in a neighbor's arms on January 3rd, 1903, at the age of 65. Later, Hitler suffered a severe lung illness and, on the doctor's advice, stayed out of school for about a year. Due to financial difficulties, he never returned, instead working as construction laborer to support his mother while continuing his drawings. The career issue in my life was resolved much sooner than I had expected, for my father died suddenly when I was only 13. A stroke struck him down in the prime of his life, ending it without pain but leaving us in deep grief. His greatest wish had been to spare me from the hardships he had faced in his early years by helping me secure a profession. He never lived to see that wish fulfilled, yet unknowingly, he had planted within me the seeds of a future neither of us had imagined. Among the books he read, anti-Semitism began to appear. At first, he opposed the idea, but as he came to believe that Jews favor one another in all areas, culture, art, politics, business, he began to dislike them. He explained it as follows. Whenever a theater performance or a piece of music was excessively praised, I would see that it was of Jewish origin. Those exaggerating it were also Jews, since they had taken control of many fields. They favored each other in every area. While a fine German work could not score more than 5 out of 10, Jewish works would receive a perfect 10. For this reason, I decided to become an anti-Semite. When his mother fell ill and their sources of income were nearly exhausted, Hitler survived on an orphan's pension. Because of this, he decided to move to Vienna. With a suitcase full of clothes and underwear, I set out for Vienna with an unshakable will. My father had challenged fate 50 years earlier. I would do the same, but I would become a man, not a civil servant. In 1907, He applied to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, but was rejected on the grounds that he was not suited for painting and was advised to pursue architecture instead. Although Adolf greatly wished to follow this advice, it required technical training and a high school diploma. At the age of 19, he lost his mother to breast cancer, December 21st, 1907. He often spoke of the special bond he shared with her and admitted that her death affected him more deeply than his father's. After her passing, Hitler's only desire was to gain admission to the Academy of Fine Arts. I was devoted to my father, and I loved my mother. In 1908, Hitler was rejected by the Academy again, losing hope and all his money. He gave his orphan's pension to his sister, spent his small inheritance, and moved into a homeless shelter in 1909. He survived by selling postcard-style paintings, later moving to a home for working men in 1910. By the age of 14 or 15, I began hearing the word Jew in political discussions. At first, I thought the only difference between Germans and Jews was religion, and I felt no hostility toward them. When I arrived in Vienna, I was unaware that 200,000 of its 2 million residents were Jews. Gradually, my restless thoughts settled, and I began to notice the Jewish question more closely. At the time, I saw Jews simply as followers of another faith and condemned any religious hostility. I also found Vienna's anti-Jewish press unworthy of a civilized nation. While in Vienna, Hitler began developing anti-Semitic thoughts, particularly toward the large community of Eastern European Orthodox Jews, whom he described as a racially distinct, traditional, and prejudiced group. Over time, he was influenced by the racial ideologies of Lanz von Liebenfels, as well as the polemics of politicians like Vienna's mayor and Christian Social Party founder Karl Lueger, one of history's most extreme demagogues, and pan-Germanist George Ritter von Schauner. In Mein Kampf, he later described his shift from opposing religiously motivated anti-Semitism to supporting it on a racial basis. With the last of his father's inheritance, Hitler moved to Munich in May 1912, having always wanted to live in what he considered real Germany. He became increasingly interested in architecture and in the writings of Houston Stewart Chamberlain. Hitler began claiming that Jews were the natural enemies of the so-called Aryan race and blamed them for Austria's political crisis. He also merged his anti-Semitism with anti-Marxism, defining socialism, especially Bolshevism, whose leadership he believed included many Jews, as a threat. He held Jews responsible for Germany's military defeat and, by extension, for the economic problems that followed, linking them to the events of the 1917 Russian Revolution. After closely observing sessions of the multi-ethnic Austro-Hungarian parliament, he developed a firm belief in the inferiority and baseness of democratic parliamentary systems, a view that became central to his political ideology. Moving to Munich also allowed him to temporarily evade compulsory military service in Austria, though he was later arrested by Austrian authorities. Following a physical examination and a plea of remorse, he was deemed unfit for service and allowed to return to Munich. Nevertheless, in August 1914, when Germany entered World War I, Hitler urgently petitioned King Ludwig III of Bavaria for permission to serve in a Bavarian regiment. His request was granted, and he volunteered for the Bavarian Army. Hitler was assigned to the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment under Colonel Julius List on the Western Front, and took part in the battles of Ypres, Somme, Arras, and Passchendaele. Serving as a messenger in France and Belgium, he never complained about harsh conditions, preferred discussing art and history, wrote poems, and created drawings for the Army newspaper. For his bravery, he was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class in December 1914 and the Rare Iron Cross First Class on August 4th, 1918, an honor seldom given to a corporal. Notably, the officer who nominated him for the medal was Jewish. He also received the Black Wound Badge on May 18, 1918. His rank did not rise, either due to a lack of leadership skills or because he was not a German citizen. In 1916, he was wounded and returned to front in 1917. On October 15, 1918, he temporarily lost his sight in a gas attack. Some experts believe this was a result of a hysterical episode. During the war, Hitler became a passionate admirer of Germany, and surrender in November 1918 deeply shocked him. Like many nationalists, he believed in the stab-in-the-back myth. Witnesses described him as obedient, calm, a non-smoker, a teetotaler, uninterested in social life, and someone who spent his time reading and painting. Entry into politics. Joining the Thule and Guido von List societies. Hitler met Dietrich Eckart, one of the founders of the German Workers' Party and a member of the occult Thule Society. Eckart became Hitler's mentor, exchanging ideas with him and introducing him to a wide cross-section of Munich society. Notably, among the occult books from Hitler's personal library that were preserved at the U.S. Library of Congress after World War II, a book by Guido von List titled Deutsche Mythologische Landschaftsbilder contains a dedication that reads, "To my dear Armanen brother, Adolf Hitler." Since the term Armanen was coined by Guido von List and the dedication was written specifically for members of the List Society, it is believed that Hitler was a member of the List Society. 2 years after World War I, on March 31st, 1920, Adolf Hitler was officially discharged from the army and returned to civilian life. As revealed by the famous historians Alan Bullock and Ian Kershaw, and as is officially known, Hitler moved into room 41 of the famous Thyerstrasse residence in Munich on the same day. Right next to this room was the office of the Völkischer Beobachter, the most popular nationalist newspaper in Germany at the time, which was owned by Baron Sebetendorf, the founder of the Thule Society, and later gifted to Hitler. After personally meeting Sebetendorf in Munich, Hitler first joined the German Workers' Party, and then the Thule Society with membership number 555-7. Joining the German Workers' Party, Hitler participated in the Munich Revolution, and for a time was a socialist activist. Later, he was trained in the Bavarian Army's intelligence branch, Bayerische Reichswehrgruppenkommando NR.4, under Captain Karl Mayer, and engaged in counter-revolutionary activities. After World War I and the German defeat, Hitler tried to remain in the army for as long as possible because he had no formal education or career. Around this time, through Dietrich Eckart, whom he befriended in 1914 and described as a spiritual father, Hitler became a member of the Thule Society, founded by Rudolf von Sebetendorf, whom the Nazis called their chief teacher and where Nazism was born. Shortly after, he began reading the Oster magazine, published by Adolf Joseph Lanz between 1905 and 1917, and adopted the ideas of white racial supremacy, anti-Semitism, and anti-communism. He spent the winter as a guard in a prisoner camp in Traunstein, near the Austrian border. He returned to Munich in the spring of 1919. In Munich, he was collecting information for the investigation commission established by the 2nd Infantry Regiment to scrutinize the officials of the short-lived Soviet regime. For his services, he was given a new job in the Press and News Bureau of the Army's Regional Command Political Department. The Army established political education courses for soldiers to spread its conservative views. Hitler was an attentive student in one of these courses. One day, when a good word was used for the Jews in a lecture, he immediately intervened and delivered a long speech denigrating them instead. His superiors were so pleased with his speech that they appointed him a Bildungsoffizier, education officer, in the Munich regiment. His main task was to combat dangerous ideas like pacifism, socialism, and democracy. Thus, Hitler had the opportunity to test his public speaking skills, which, in his view, was the first prerequisite for a successful politician. One day in September 1919, he received an order from the Army's political department to investigate a small political group in Munich called the German Workers' Party, which had been founded by the Thule Society. Hitler knew one of the speakers at the party meeting he was ordered to investigate. A week earlier, he had listened to a lecture by a civil engineer named Gottfried Feder at one of the Army's training courses, and was very pleased with it. After Feder's speech at the party meeting, Hitler was about to leave. At that moment, a professor stood up and questioned the validity of Feder's ideas. He proposed that Bavaria should separate from Prussia and, together with Austria, form a South German nation. This idea was very popular in Munich at the time, but his announcement there angered Hitler so much that he stood up and gave such a harsh response that the professor left the room, leaving the listeners staring at this unknown young speaker with astonished faces. One of the listeners rushed over to Hitler and pressed a small pamphlet into his hand. This person was Anton Drexler, a blacksmith. Drexler can be considered the real founder of National Socialism in terms of political organization. Hitler was very surprised to receive a card the next day informing him of his acceptance into the German Workers' Party. Hitler actually wanted to found his own party, So, just as he was about to write a letter to that effect, he became curious and decided to attend a committee meeting he was invited to and personally explain why he did not want to join their party. He went to the meeting and was well received, but could not state his desire not to join. After the meeting, he returned to his barracks. He thought for a long time over the next 2 days, and then decided to join this unknown party. Adolf Hitler thus became the 7th member of the German Workers' Party, Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, DAP, which had been founded by the engineer Gottfried Feder and 6 other people. In early 1920, Hitler took over the party's propaganda. On February 24th, 1920, the name of the German Workers' Party was changed to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, NSDAP. The supporters of the NSDAP were contemptuously called Nazis by communists and social democrats. Sebetendorf, the owner of the Völkischer Beobachter newspaper, the largest propaganda tool of the Thule in Germany, transferred it to Hitler, whom he had chosen as a Führer, upon his joining the presidency of the Thule Society. Meanwhile, Joseph Goebbels ensured that the newspaper became a complete party bulletin. He published articles in the newspaper explaining his party's ideas. Hitler, as the owner of the newspaper, rose through the ranks of the party and became its leader on July 29, 1921. The party prepared a 25-point program. The first point of this program was to save Germany from a weakness brought about by the Treaty of Versailles. Later, in 1926, Hitler declared these points to be unchangeable for tactical reasons. One of the important points was that German citizenship should be for those who had German blood only. Beer Hall, Putsch, and Mein Kampf. Imitating Benito Mussolini's March on Rome, he staged a Beer Hall, Putsch in Munich on November 8th to 9th, 1923. To overthrow the Bavarian government. He was prosecuted for forming paramilitary units against the regular army and attempting to overthrow the legitimate government. On April 1st, 1924, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Rudolf von Sebetendorf, who was conducting research in Tibet at the time, returned to Germany in October 1924. Following a 4-page letter written by Sebetendorf to George Neidhart, one of the judges of the Bavarian People's Court, on October 4th, 1924, as is known, on December 20th, 1924, Hitler was released by the Bavarian People's Court, with Judge Neidhart's decision, on the ground that he did not pose a threat to public order and the people, and was not associated with paramilitary organizations seeking to overthrow the legitimate government. During this period, Hitler, who wrote the book Mein Kampf, My Struggle, with the help of Rudolf Hess, was able to present the party's future goals to the public, as he had written a book containing his autobiography and ideas while in prison. The book guided the party's activities from then on. After being released from prison, Hitler reorganized the party. The party was unsuccessful until 1929. However, after the Great Depression, it gained more votes, 1929. In the 1930 elections, it became the second largest party after the SPD, with 18% of the vote. Hitler's votes came more from Protestants than Catholics, from rural areas and cities, and from the middle upper class and workers. Rise to power. In 1925, Hitler, who had voluntarily renounced his Austrian citizenship, was still not a German citizen and was in danger of not even being able to run for elections. This was a big problem for him. On February 25, 1932, the National Socialist Interior Minister of the state of Brunswick announced that he had appointed Hitler as an attaché to the Brunswick Representative Office in Berlin. With this comical maneuver, Hitler automatically became a citizen of Brunswick, and therefore a German citizen, qualifying him to run for the presidency of Germany. Having easily overcome this obstacle, Hitler threw himself into the election campaign with great energy. Hitler's opponents in the presidential election on March 13, 1932, were Paul von Hindenburg, the independent candidate who had been president since 1925, Ernst Thälmann, the KPD candidate, and Theodor Duesterberg, the Stahlhelm/DNVP candidate. Hitler received 11,339,446 votes in the elections, which was 30.1%. His strongest opponent, Hindenburg, received 18,651,497 votes. Hindenburg's votes corresponded to 49.6%, but he missed the presidency by a very small margin, 0.4%, and the election went to a second round. The second round of the presidential election was held on April 10, 1932. In this round, Hitler received 13,418,547 votes, 36.8%. Hindenburg received 19,359,983 votes, with a rate of 53%, and was elected president. Hitler finished second in these elections. A few months after the presidential elections, on July 31, 1932, the party participated in a general election for the third time. The election results again failed to produce a party with a parliamentary majority. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, which received 37% of the total votes, did not have a majority in parliament, but was the party with the most seats. In January 1933, fears that communists would create a revolutionary situation by paralyzing the entire economy with a general strike, or that a civil war would break out in the country, were so deep that President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor in the hope that he would form a stable government in coalition with the Catholic Center Party. However, an agreement could not be reached with the Catholic Center Party. Instead, Hitler, who received the support of the German National People's Party, DNVP, led by media magnate Alfred Hagenberg, formed a coalition with this party. Reichstag fire. On the evening of February 27, 1933, a fire broke out in the Reichstag. Although it was claimed that this fire was started by the Gestapo, the Gestapo's police organization, the police investigation focused more on the communists. The next day, Hitler had Hindenburg sign a decree that abolished the articles of the Constitution related to individual rights and freedoms. In the following days, the publications and election activities of all parties, except the NSDAP and DNVP, were stopped. Hitler led the country to a new general election on March 5, 1933. During the election campaign, he secured large amounts of financial support from industry, finance, and insurance giants. In the March 5, 1933 elections, the votes of the National Socialist German Workers' Party rose to 44%, although the votes of the non-National Socialist German National People's Party and other nationalist or conservative parties had decreased. A majority in parliament could still be secured. The Enabling Act. Immediately after the elections, an Enabling Act was passed by Parliament. This law transferred all the powers of the Reichstag to the cabinet for 4 years and suspended its work for this period. However, such a law requires a two-thirds majority in Parliament. How this majority was secured is also recorded in the minutes of the Nuremberg International Military Tribunal. On the day the vote was to be held, Parliament was surrounded by the SA, and some social democratic parliamentarians were not allowed inside. The 81 communist parliamentarians had already been detained before the elections. Adolf Hitler took office on March 21, 1933, as ceremony held at the Garrison Church in Potsdam. This event, to be known as the Day of Potsdam, Tag von Potsdam, was held to show the unity between the National Socialist movement and the old Prussian elites and the army. Hitler appeared in a frock coat and humbly greeted President Paul von Hindenburg. On March 23, 1933, the law to remedy the distress of the people in the Reich, Gesetz zur Behebung der Notwehrvolk in die Reich, was accepted by the Parliament. Parliamentary democracy in Germany thus came to an end. In line with the political regulations of the new National Socialist regime, the Third Reich was declared by the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which became the foremost representative of the German people. There would no longer be real elections, and the members of Parliament would be chosen by the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The legitimate basis of the Führer position, in which Hitler had broad powers, is only this Enabling Act. As a result of Parliament granting him extensive powers, Hitler became the sole leader of the German Empire after March 23, 1933. He got rid of the pressure of Parliament or President Hindenburg in daily affairs and rendered him ineffective. This was because this decree gave him legislative and executive powers. Through laws passed in 1933, he banned other parties. He declared himself the infallible great leader of the Germans, and a part of the German people supported him. After this, Germany followed Hitler until his death. Hitler promised the people that he would save the country from its current situation, and began his work toward this end. He used extremely high unemployment in Germany for war preparations, creating jobs. He had large highways built across the country. On August 2nd, 1934, Paul von Hindenburg died. Thereupon, Hitler also took over the office of the president. To present his rise to the presidency for the approval of the people, a referendum was held on August 19th, 1934, Volksabstimmung über das Staatsoberhaupt des Deutschen Reichs. As a result of the referendum, 89.93% of the votes were yes, giving public approval for Hitler to become president and continue his chancellorship. Night of the Long Knives. In the second year of his rule, Hitler ordered the murder of many senior SA members. On the night of June 30th to July 1st, 1934, at least 85 people were massacred by SS officers. It is claimed that Hitler gave such an order to gain the trust of the army. After the operation, Hitler managed to establish full authority over the army and began to grow the Wehrmacht to ensure the security of Europe and Germany against a Soviet invasion. It is argued by historians that this was a turning point for the Third Reich. Nazi Germany, domestic policy, anti-Semitism, and eugenics. Hitler pointed to Jews and some minorities, such as Roma, as the cause of all the problems in the country. He succeeded in making a part of the German people believe these and similar demagogic statements, and received great support. He moved to cleanse Germany of Jewish capital economically, as well as to expel them from political and cultural spheres. He gathered Jews in concentration camps. After separating those who could work, the others were killed in gas chambers and their bodies were burned in furnaces. These activities were carried out not only in Germany, but also in all the countries that were later occupied. In this way, millions of Jews were killed in Europe. Hitler's early eugenics policies targeted physically and developmentally disabled children in a program called Action Brand, and later euthanasia program was approved for adults with severe mental and physical disabilities, now known as Action T4, economic policy. Immediately after coming to power, Hitler aimed to regulate the German economy. As a result of both the defeat in World War I and the general economic crisis of 1929, the German economy was in serious trouble. The hyperinflation, extreme unemployment, and low industrial capacity that followed were quickly brought under control with the economic policies pursued by the Nazis. The Nazis came to power in the midst of the Great Depression. At that time, the unemployment rate was close to 30%. In 1938, unemployment in Germany disappeared. From the beginning of the Nazi rise to power, 1933, to the beginning of World War II, 1939, weekly earnings in Germany increased by 19% in real terms, but this was largely due to employees working longer hours, and hourly wage rates remained close to the lowest levels reached during the Great Depression. In addition, declining foreign trade meant that consumer goods, such as poultry, fruit, and clothing were rationed for many Germans. Industrial production, which was 56 in 1933, rose to 144 in 1938. The developments in the German economy and the economic policies pursued by the Nazis since they came to power under Hitler in 1933 are still considered an extraordinary success today. Immediately after Hitler took full control of the government, all trade unions were shut down, all workers were gathered under a single labor union, and workers' dues were transferred to the general budget. In an economy where wage increases and the resulting possibility of strikes were eliminated, there was naturally an increase in employment. The decrease in labor costs and peace and stability in the business world increased the demand for labor. He made great investments in technological and military fields. Foreign policy. Cooperation with the Vatican. Adolf Hitler was born into a Catholic family. Although it is claimed that he lived and died as a Catholic, this is not a definite possibility. It is also speculated that he may have adopted pre-Christian pagan beliefs of Germanic communities, which were enriched with national myths and sanctified the supremacy of the German race. Whatever Hitler's religious beliefs were, his relationship with the Vatican was always positive due to Germany's political interests during his era. Rearmament, March 16, 1935. After reviving the German economy, Hitler moved to implement his military strategy, which formed the basis of his foreign policy. The first step in the strategy was to free the German land, sea, and air forces from the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. As a result, The production of large tonnage warships, submarines, and armored land vehicles began, and the size of the land army was increased. Anglo-German Naval Agreement, June 18, 1935. To prevent Germany's rearmament, the United Kingdom, France, and Italy met in Stresa between April 11 and 14, 1935, and formed the Stresa Front. However, on June 18th, the United Kingdom reached an agreement with Germany, accepting that Germany could have warships up to 35% of the total tonnage of the British Navy, 420,595 tons, excluding submarines, causing the Stresa Front to collapse. Anti-Comintern Pact, November 25, 1936. Through the initiatives of Lieutenant General Hiroshi Oshima, the military attaché of the Japanese embassy, and Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr of National Socialist Germany, the Anti-Comintern Pact was signed on November 25, 1936, to prevent the international communist movement of the Comintern from spreading to their countries. Anschluss, March 12, 1938. The annexation of Austria, Anschluss, on March 12, 1938, was a first step in Hitler's efforts to create the greater Germany of his dreams. The annexation of Austria was followed by the transfer of the Saar region, which had been under control of the League of Nations for 15 years, to Germany, the transfer of the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia to Germany, Germany's invasion of Czechoslovakia, and finally, the invasion of Poland. The path to the annexation began with Germany's pressure for the recognition of the illegal Austrian National Socialist Party by Austria and the acceptance of a government coalition. In 1938, Austrian Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg, in a last-ditch effort to preserve independence, decided to hold a referendum on unification with Germany or independence. At that time, Germany pressured Schuschnigg to hand over power to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. As a result of this well-planned coup, when the Austrian National Socialist Party took control in Vienna on March 11th, the German armies entered Austria without any resistance. The international reaction to the annexation of Austria was mild. The Treaty of Versailles had forbidden the unification of Austria and Germany, and the Allied powers of World War I, tasked with overseeing this, limited themselves to diplomatic protests. An independent Austria only reemerged after World War II ended. Munich Conference, September 29th to 30th, 1938. Hitler's second strategic goal was to annex regions with a German-speaking population into German territory. The steps of the strategic phase began with the annexation of Austria on March 12, 1938. The second step was the Sudetenland region within Czechoslovakia. With Hitler's pressure, the Sudetenland was given to Germany with the Munich Agreement signed on September 29, 1938. The conference was an agreement attended by the German, Italian, British, and French prime ministers, without Czechoslovakia having a representative. Hitler did not waste any time in implementing the agreement. On October 1, 1938, the Sudetenland, where Germans made up more than 50% of the population, was occupied by the Germans, again without the use of weapons, based on international agreements. On March 15, 1939, they would add the rest of Czechoslovakia to their territories. France and Britain remained silent about this because they did not want a new war across Europe. The annexation of the Czech industry to Germany further facilitated Germany's war preparations. World War II. After strengthening the Wehrmacht, Hitler began to lay the foundations of the Lebensraum he needed to create for the German nation, according to his ideology. First, he carried out the unification with Austria, Anschluss. Immediately after, he obtained the Sudetenland through the Munich Agreement. Then, disregarding the agreement, he occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia with his ally Hungary. He demanded and received the Memel region from Lithuania. The last thing to be done was to merge East Prussia with the mainland to guarantee the territorial integrity of Prussia. On August 23, 1939, he made an agreement with the Soviets to jointly partition Poland and Eastern Europe. On the evening of September 1st, he gave a note to Poland for the annexation of the city of Danzig to Germany, and the note was rejected. Thereupon, Hitler intervened militarily in Poland. In the following process, the United Kingdom and France also declared war on Germany, and World War II effectively began. Alliance with Japan. In February 1938, on the recommendation of the newly appointed foreign minister, the strongly pro-Japanese Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler ended the Sino-German alliance with the Republic of China and instead entered into an alliance with the more modern and powerful empire Japan. Hitler announced Germany's recognition of Manchukuo, the Japanese-occupied state in Manchuria, and the Germans abandoned their claims on the former Pacific colonies held by Japan. Hitler ordered an end to arms shipments to China and recalled all German officers working with the Chinese army. In retaliation, Chinese General Chiang Kai-shek canceled all Sino-German economic agreements, depriving the Germans of many Chinese raw materials. Poland. Germany attacked Poland on the morning of September 1st without any declaration of war. According to the German plan, with the troops shifted from the Western Front, Poland would be occupied within a month, and the army would immediately turn its full force to the west. The first examples of the blitzkrieg tactics used by Wehrmacht generals during the war were seen in Poland. German troops quickly captured Warsaw. The east of the country was taken by the Soviets, who had an agreement with the Germans, Case Yellow and Case Red. After Germany captured Poland, it shifted its military power and built up to the west. However, Allied generals could not exactly predict whether Germany would attack, or where it would attack if it did attack France. The Germans, on the other hand, would not use the Schlieffen Plan, which foresaw an attack from the coast, again to avoid a second Marne disaster. The German general staff included the Netherlands in the occupation zone to make the Allies think they were using a modernized Schlieffen Plan. But the main blow would be the armored divisions attacking from the Ardennes region. Indeed, the Allies thought that the wooded area in the Ardennes would prevent or restrict any armored attack. But the plans failed. The BEF and the French army were defeated by the Germans in 20 days. About 1,400,000 soldiers of the BEF in France were saved from being captured by the Dunkirk evacuation. Thereupon, the United Kingdom, which would have resisted a landing fiercely anyway, secured the safety of its mainland. Shortly after, the French army surrendered, and collaborationist Vichy France was established. Operation Barbarossa. After Germany was victorious on the Polish, Denmark, Norway, and French fronts, it launched a punitive attack on Yugoslavia, which had left the Axis Pact with a military coup, and then occupied it. Then, together with Bulgaria, it occupied Greece, which was at war with its ally, the Kingdom of Italy. Hitler believed that German communists had a great influence on the loss of World War I, and he made gestures and speeches implying that the Soviets were the main provocateurs. In Mein Kampf, which he wrote in prison after the failed beer hall putsch and put forward his political views, he explicitly said that for the German race to survive, it must expand its Lebensraum eastward. Stalin, on the other hand, had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and, ignoring many problems and as a result of the arrogant behavior of the Allies, had occupied Eastern Europe together with Nazi Germany. However, some problems of the Red Army had emerged during the Winter War, and Hitler took advantage of this. With the Vienna Diktat, a fascist government was established in Romania, and Bulgaria entered the war on the side of the Axis powers in exchange for a part of Greek Macedonia and Dobruja. Finland had a shaky peace after the Winter War, and was in a state of wanting to regain the territories it had lost. In addition, the aggressive movements of the Red Army constantly led to more radical governments in the border countries. The German army quickly amassed its full force on the Eastern Front. At the end of the summer of 1941, without a declaration of war, the first German troops attacked the Soviets, and the Eastern Front Wars, which would last for 4 years, began. Afrika Korps and the Italian Campaign. Germany's ally Italy initially seemed to be successful against the British in Libya, but later lost a very important position in Libya and was unsuccessful. Thereupon, the German General Staff decided to help Italy. Although the Afrika Korps was successful with the legendary commander Erwin Rommel, it was trapped by the constantly supported British Army. The Afrika Korps was not on priority front. The priority was the Eastern Front, and by the fact that Germany had declared war on the USA after the Pearl Harbor attack as a result of the agreement it had signed with Japan, and as a result, the USA had attacked Vichy France. In addition, with the British breaking the German Enigma encryption system, the route and time of the aid to be sent to Africa were known in advance and were destroyed by the dominant British Navy in the Mediterranean before they could reach the North African ports. After a certain period, he was assigned to the defense of Sicily and southern Italy via Tunisia. However, after the Allies' successful landings in Sardinia, Anzio, and Sicily, when they began to advance toward Rome, the Italian government surrendered unconditionally. Despite this, the remnant of the defeated Italian army established some defense lines north of Rome. The war here passed in a stagnant state. Normandy. The entry of America into the war changed the balance of power. The Allies had won the war in Italy but had not made any realistic progress against Germany, and had even been stopped. It was necessary to attack mainland Europe from different points. At first, a landing in the Balkans was considered against the approaching Soviet invasion, but later the decision was made for France. In the summer of 1944, the Allies landed on the Normandy beaches from 4 beaches and attacked areas such as Cannon Cherbourg with airborne divisions. After bloody struggles, the German army was able to stop the Allied army at the borders of Alsace-Lorraine and Belgium. Although it was able to carry out certain counterattacks, like in the Ardennes, it suffered a complete defeat, and Germany's manpower and resources were depleted. The Allies slowly began to occupy Germany from the west. Hitler's delay in responding to the Normandy landings in 1944 gave the Allies the necessary time to secure the coast. Soviet advance in the Battle of Berlin. The balance on the Eastern Front changed with Germany's entry into the war in Italy and France. As a result of the changing balance, the Soviets began a rapid advance. Due to the large number of soldiers captured at Stalingrad, the German army was in a weak position. Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Finland successively changed sides. In Yugoslav territory, partisan groups took control of certain areas. In the spring of 1945, Soviet troops captured Poland and began to advance into Pomerania. In January 1945, while most of Germany was in ruins, Hitler said on the radio, "However grave the crisis may be at this moment, it will nevertheless be mastered by our unchangeable will." The Battle of Berlin, which began on April 16th, ended on May 2nd. The Soviet flag was flying over the Reichstag. Hitler ended his life by committing suicide on April 30th, 1945. Personal characteristics. Hitler's most important feature, generally considered, was his ability to quickly influence people. This was combined with National Socialist propaganda and presented to the public. Hitler was portrayed as a superior human being, and his attitudes and his speeches tried to make the masses listening to him feel this. The fact that most NSDAP executives adopted him obsessively, and that these executives clearly showed their dependence on Hitler's inner structure when they came together with the public, is among the effects of the propaganda. Hermann Göring, the commander of the Nazi German Air Force, said about Hitler, "I have no conscience. My conscience is Adolf Hitler." Hitler tried to show a combative personality and used body language effectively to give the impression of having superior qualities. Hard looks, sudden movements, and long speeches were details made for propaganda purposes. He tried to portray himself as an infallible, error-free leader and stated that he still firmly defended the views he had previously defended. Goebbels said about him, "The Führer never changes. He is the same now as he was when he was a child." In his life full of obsessions, he attached great importance to art and considered himself an authority, especially on painting. After his mother's death, he is known to have lived in hotel rooms, making watercolor paintings, visiting museums with the money he earned, and spending his money carelessly. He was obsessively fond of opera music. According to his memories of his youth, he would regularly spend a portion of his allowance on going to the opera. He was passionately devoted to the German opera composer Richard Wagner. Hitler's obsession with Wagner began at the age of 12. The composer had a great influence on him. Adolf Hitler wrote in the first part of his book Mein Kampf, "At the age of 12, I saw my first opera, Lohengrin. I became addicted to it at once. My youthful enthusiasm for the master of Bavaria, Richard Wagner, knew no bounds." The feeling of immortality is another of Hitler's obsessions. He may have developed this idea because his siblings born before him had died. The fact that he survived while others died gave him the feeling of being special. One of the reasons that made him feel divinely protected was that during World War I, a voice inside him told him to get up and go to another place. A bomb falling on the trench he had left and the death of his friends there made the idea he believed in obsessive. There were 42 assassination attempts on Hitler. He managed to survive most of them with minor injuries. His death, as the German defeat became certain and hopelessness increased, on April 30th, 1945, he and his wife Eva Braun decided to commit suicide in Berlin. They locked themselves in a room, and first, Eva Braun bit a capsule containing cyanide, and the poison took effect in seconds. Immediately after, Hitler bit a cyanide capsule and simultaneously shot himself in the right temple with a pistol. No gunpowder residue was found on Hitler's jawbone, which indicates that Hitler did not die from a gunshot wound to mouth. At his request, their bodies were soaked in gasoline in the garden of the Führer bunker and burned in a crater caused by bombs. It is claimed that the reason for Hitler's request was that he did not want to be captured and exhibited by the Soviet army. Before committing suicide, he told his generals, "You must never let my body fall into the hands of the Russians. They will make a statue of me in Moscow." When the Russian forces entered and found the bodies of Hitler and Eva Braun, who were identified in the autopsy with dental records, were moved around for a while to prevent them from becoming a kind of shrine, and then they were buried at the new headquarters of the secret Soviet department SMERSH in Magdeburg. On April 4th, 1970, a Soviet KGB team exhumed the remains of Hitler and Braun from the grave at the SMERSH facility in Magdeburg, burned them completely, and their ashes were scattered into the Biederitz River, a tributary of the Elbe. Hitler left orders for the destruction to continue after his death and, in his will, bypassed other NSDAP leaders, naming Karl Donitz as President of Germany and Joseph Goebbels as Chancellor of Germany. Despite this, Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda Goebbels also committed suicide on May 1st, 1945. In his first will, his political testament, Hitler stated that Germany must never cease to pursue the Jews and Bolshevism, which are as dangerous as poison for all nations and the German nation. According to Hitler, this fact would undoubtedly determine the future of Germany. Hitler defended that he was right to go to war and blamed the defeat on his generals, whom he accused of being cowardly and deceitful. In his second will, his private testament, he wanted a museum to be established in his hometown of Linz with the works of art he had collected throughout his life. He stated that he left all his personal belongings to the party, or to the state if the party no longer existed. Personal life. Family. Hitler created a public image of himself as a single man devoted entirely to his political mission and the nation, with no home life. In 1929, he met his mistress, Eva Braun, and married her on April 29, 1945, one day before they both committed suicide. In September 1931, his half-niece Jelly Robbel committed suicide in his Munich apartment with Hitler's pistol. Rumors at the time included that Jelly was in a romantic relationship with him, and that her death caused him deep, lasting pain. Hitler's younger sister and the last surviving member of his immediate family, Paula Hitler, died in June 1960. Views on religion. Hitler was born to a Catholic mother and an anti-clerical father. After leaving home, Hitler never attended church or Mass again. Albert Speer notes that Hitler attacked the Catholic Church to his political companions and was not affiliated with the church, although he never officially left it. He adds that Hitler felt that in the absence of an organized religion, people would turn to mysticism, which he thought was regressive. According to Speer, Hitler believed that Japanese religious beliefs or Islam would be a more suitable religion for Germans than tame and slack Christianity. Historian John S. Conway notes that Hitler was fundamentally against the Christian churches. According to Bullock, Hitler did not believe in God, was anti-clerical, and despised Christian ethics because they were contrary to his preferred idea of survival of the fittest. He favored aspects of Protestantism that suited his views and adopted some elements of the Catholic Church's hierarchical organization, rituals, and phrases. Hitler saw the church as a significant political conservative influence on society and adopted a strategic relationship with the church that was appropriate for his immediate political purposes. While publicly Hitler claimed to believe in an Aryan Christ who fought against the Jews, he often praised the Christian heritage and German Christian culture. His pro-Christian rhetoric was contradicted by his private statements describing Christianity as nonsense and rubbish based on lies. According to the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, report the Nazi master plan. Hitler planned to destroy the influence of Christian churches within the Reich. The ultimate goal was the complete elimination of Christianity. This goal informed his movement early on, but he found it inappropriate to express this extreme position publicly. According to Bullock, Hitler had wanted to wait for the end of the war before implementing this plan. Speer wrote that Hitler had a negative view of the mystical ideas of Heinrich Himmler and Alfred Rosenberg, and Himmler's attempt to mythologize the SS. Hitler was more pragmatic, and his passions were focused on more practical concerns. After World War II, Hitler's wife Eva Braun's sister, Ilse Braun, stated that Hitler constantly criticized Christianity and praised Islam, which he saw as a strong and practical belief, and often argued with her sister, Eva, about it. In addition to Christianity, Hitler also harshly criticized atheism. Health. Researchers have variously suggested that Hitler suffered from irritable bowel syndrome, skin diseases, irregular heartbeat, coronary sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, syphilis, giant cell arteritis, and tinnitus. In a report prepared for the OSS in 1943, Walter C. Langer of Harvard University described Hitler as a neurotic psychopath. In his 1977 book, The Psychopathic God, Adolf Hitler, historian Robert J. Waite suggests that he suffered from borderline personality disorder. Historians Henrik Eberle and Hans Joachim Neumann believe that although he suffered from a number of diseases, including Parkinson's, Hitler did not have pathological delusions and was always fully aware of his decisions and therefore responsible. Theories about Hitler's medical condition are difficult to prove, and giving them too much weight can have the effect of attributing many of the events and consequences of Nazi Germany to the probably impaired physical health of one individual. Ian Kershaw believes that it is better to take a broader view of German history by examining which social forces led to the Nazi dictatorship and its policies, rather than seeking narrow explanations based on only one person for the Holocaust and World War II. In the 1930s, Hitler sometimes adopted a mainly vegetarian diet, and from 1942, he avoided all meat and fish. At social events, he sometimes gave graphic descriptions of the slaughter of animals in an attempt to make his guests abstain from meat. His private secretary, Martin Bormann, had a greenhouse built near the Berghof near Berchtesgaden to provide Hitler with a regular supply of fresh fruits and vegetables. While he was a vegetarian, Hitler stopped drinking alcohol and thereafter only very rarely drank beer or wine in social settings. He did not smoke for most of his adult life, but he smoked heavily in his youth, 25 to 40 cigarettes a day. He eventually quit, calling the habit a waste of money. He encouraged his close friends to quit smoking by giving a golden watch to anyone who could break the habit. Hitler began using amphetamines occasionally after 1937 and became addicted in late 1942. Speer attributed this amphetamine use to Hitler's increasingly erratic behavior and inflexible decision-making process, e.g., he rarely allowed military retreats on the fronts and delayed responding to the Normandy landings. During the war years, Hitler, for whom his personal physician Theodor Morell wrote 90 prescriptions, took many pills every day for chronic stomach problems and other ailments. He regularly consumed amphetamines, barbiturates, opiates, and cocaine, as well as potassium bromide and atropobelladonna, a bomb that exploded during an assassination attempt on him on July 20th, 1944, tore his eardrum and removed 200 with splinters from his legs. Hitler's trembling left hand and news footage in his gait, which began before the war and worsened toward the end of his life, are visible. Ernst Gunther Schenk and several other doctors who met Hitler in the last weeks of his life also diagnosed him with Parkinson's disease. In September 1944, Otto Skorzeny met with Hitler at Woolshands and noted that the war had placed a noticeable strain on Hitler. I was deeply shaken by the appearance of the commander-in-chief, remembering what he looked like when I last saw him the previous autumn. He was stooped and looked much older, and there was a tired tone in his voice. I wondered if he had caught a disease. His left hand trembled so violently that he had to hold it with his right hand when he stood up. There are also experts who oppose the claim that Hitler had Parkinson's disease. Hitler's suicide is compared to the breaking of a spell today. Public support for Hitler collapsed when he died, and very few Germans mourned his death. Ian Kershaw argues that most civilians and military personnel were too busy coming to terms with the country's collapse or escaping the war to gain any benefit. According to historian John Toland, National Socialism burst like a bubble without its leader. In July 1952, 24% of all West Germans still had a good opinion of Hitler. Hitler's actions and Nazi ideology are almost universally considered to be extremely immoral. According to Kershaw, never in history has such destruction, physical and moral, been associated with the name of a single man. Hitler's political program led to a world war, leaving behind a devastated and impoverished Eastern and Central Europe. Germany was subjected to wholesale destruction, which was described as stunned null zero hour. Hitler's policies caused human suffering on an unprecedented scale. According to R.J. Rummel, the Nazi regime was responsible for the murder of an estimated 19.3 million civilians and prisoners of war. In addition, 28.7 million soldiers and civilians died as a result of military operations on the European front of World War II. The number of civilians killed during World War II was unprecedented in the history of warfare. Historians, philosophers, and politicians often use the word evil to describe the Nazi regime. Many European countries have made both the promotion of Nazism and the denial of the Holocaust a crime. Historian Friedrich Meinecke described Hitler as one of the greatest examples of the singular and incalculable power of personality in historical life. The British historian Hugh Trevor Roper saw him as among the terrible simplifiers of history, the most systematic, the most historical, the most philosophical, and yet the crudest, most ruthless, and least sublime leader the world has ever seen. According to historian John M. Roberts, Hitler's defeat brought an end to a history of a Europe dominated by Germany. Instead, the Cold War, a global conflict between the Western Bloc dominated by the United States and other NATO countries, and the Eastern Bloc dominated by the Soviet Union, emerged. Historian Sebastian Hafner claims that without Hitler and the displacement of the Jews, the modern nation-state of Israel could not have existed. He claims that without Hitler, the old European spheres of influence and the end of colonialism would have been delayed. Furthermore, Hafner claims that besides Alexander the Great, Hitler also had a more significant impact than other comparable historical figures in that he caused widespread global changes in a relatively short period. According to statistics, Adolf Hitler is the person with the most publications written about him after Jesus of Nazareth. Propaganda. Throughout his political career, Hitler appeared and acted in a series of propaganda films, many of which were made by Leni Riefenstahl, who is considered a pioneer of modern filmmaking. Hitler's propaganda film appearances include Der Sieg des Glaubens, The Victory of Faith, 1933, Triumph des Willens, Triumph of the Will, 1935, Tag der Freiheit, Unsere Wehrmacht, Day of Freedom, Our Armed Forces, 1935, Olympia, 1938,